Everybody, and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sports. For today, something a little bit different. We're doing a bit of a review of Chasing the Sun 2, Episode 2, which debuted last night on Supersport, and was another very good episode, but a very interesting episode, and well, very quotable, but a bit more insight into exactly what sort of went down in the Springbok camp during the World Cup to get a team that maybe, in the words of Dr. Nino, didn't deserve to have gone that far, or maybe shouldn't have gone as far as they did in terms of what happened to the squad, but managed to develop themselves into a World Cup winning team. Yeah, so obviously Chasing the Sun sort of documents the process, and we get to see a lot of insight into exactly sort of what goes on behind the scenes, as well as sort of exactly the good and the bad parts of a World Cup campaign and how things actually really function in professional sport. So before you get stuck into the episode, please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. So there were sort of three major things that were covered during the second episode. The first, that of the injury of Malcolm Marx. Then very quickly the Romanian game, as well as then the main sort of theme of the entire episode was the loss against Ireland. So let's start with the whole Malcolm Marx sort of injury situation. Very, very interesting to sort of see the discussion that took place, because it was probably the most controversial decision of the World Cup to replace a hooker in a squad that only had two specialist hookers with Andre Pollard, a flower half. Quite an amusing take on it when you look at, introducing the replacement hooker and it's sort of cuts to Andre Pollard. But very interesting, for example, how simple the conversation was. RASSIE ERASMUS just phoning Andre Pollard saying, "You're in." Pollard saying, "Cool, thanks." And then having to message him afterwards saying, like, "Are you actually serious? Like, am I seriously in?" And so documenting the fact that all of a sudden Marco van Staden is going to be sort of a covering hooker potentially as well. The fact that they need to give him minutes during that Romania game. So there wasn't too much about sort of the Romania game, but I think a big emphasis on the loss of Malcolm Marx being, as many would probably agree, the current best player in the world, arguably at the time. And I think if he had a strong World Cup campaign, I think for me probably would have been the leading candidate for potentially World Player of the Year. He was playing that good of a game of rugby at the time. So I think it was really good to see the emphasis of just how big a loss he was to the squad and how good of a player he was. I think people sort of forget the fact that Springboks did that without Malcolm Marx, and who is absolutely superb. But I wanted to talk about more about the Ireland game. Although the Romanian game was a nice little throwback because I was actually there. So it was very cool, sort of a reminder of what sort of went down and stuff. But the Ireland game was sort of the core focus. And what's been sort of the main theme of the second season is how the coaching staff identify what they call the soul of each team. And basically it's finding out what makes them tick and then how do we counter that. And the main thing they identified from an Irish perspective, from an Ireland team perspective, was that they are tactically very astute, very smart, and very technical. And they try to be almost quite dismissive about it, and almost sort of try and build up, even if it is a bit of a false sense of arrogance that they now need to overcome. And I thought what was brilliant, and I think it's fair enough as well, was RASSIE ERASMUS and the coaching staff showing the players the clips of the media. There was so much noise surrounding the Springboks during the World Cup, so much negativity towards the way that they use the bench, the calling up of Andre Pollard ahead of Malcolm Marx, doing things that are unorthodox, which has always been a trademark of the RASSIE ERASMUS era. And I think, playing, clips of, off the ball and various Irish pundits, Matt Williams, for example, very heavily featuring, slating the Springboks, saying that, that they're abusing the bench, clips of people accusing them of being on steroids, stuff like that. And you can see how fired up, because it's so insulting, really, what some of the media was saying about the players, about the coaches, completely dismissive of everything they've achieved, everything they are as individuals, and just really sort of just basically just pass it off as if they're not relevant. And that was sort of the idea, to sort of really gear them up for that Ireland game. What I really enjoyed was just a reminder of how good that Ireland game was. I said at the time it was arguably the greatest game of rugby I'd watched. And I stand by that. I think even now, I think I look back at that Ireland game, and I think it's one of the top 4 best games of rugby I've ever watched. Just in terms of two teams at their absolute peak, not giving each other an absolute inch, the tactical differences, the small decisions, the 6-2 split, the 7-1 split, the this type of fly half versus this type of fly half, goal kicking, and had South Africa kick better, they would have won the game potentially. That the decision right at the end, by Ben O'Keefe to call a game when the ball had just popped up, but he was on the wrong side, couldn't see the ball. There were so many small margins of error, in that game, and I really enjoyed that bit of a throwback because, Ireland, South Africa, and I think New Zealand definitely the top three best sides in the world, and I think by quite some margin. France, at the time, were definitely one of them. At the moment, I think it's sort of fallen off a little bit, but what we saw, and that's why we saw such a great quarterfinal between South Africa and France and New Zealand versus Ireland, because there was just so little between all these teams. And what I really, really thought was very interesting is the fact that the Springbok coach had emphasized Scotland was the most important game. Ireland didn't really matter. And then, at the end, we saw what maybe the real RASSIE ERASMUS. And it finished off with him absolutely tearing into the squad and basically accusing them of not taking it seriously, of not putting their bodies on the line, and being very dismissive over the World Cup, and for them almost believing that they didn't need that the Ireland match result didn't matter. And it's so interesting to see from a sports psychology point of view how these coaches get these players up. Whether it's showing them clips of people who don't rate them to sort of make them prove a point, whether it's about inspiring them to say you guys are playing for something bigger than yourselves. The whole South African narrative, which continues to be a key theme. And I think what's very interesting is how they do this. And you look back at some of the best coaches managed in the world, and I always go back to the sort of the Sir Alex Ferguson era. The greatest manager in all time in football. And he made so many mistakes over the years. He really did. But there were so many things he was so good at. And one thing he was really, really good at was being able to get players up. And he could. I mean, there always, there was always that the idea of the hairdryer treatment from Sir Alex Ferguson. And what he used to do is he used to go after players, the main players, big star players, star names, and he would go after players who we know could take it. Wayne Rooney said he used to be one of those players, and Wayne Rooney was one of those players who would give it back. But he used to challenge key big players because, if you are a junior player in the team, for example, and you see a senior player being absolutely berated by the coaches and being taken on, that suddenly makes you feel very small, and it kind of puts a bit of extra pressure, like, well, shit, they're in the firing line. I'm definitely in the firing line. And, that one small quote from RASSIE ERASMUS where he said, Siya Kolisi is not South Africa, South Africa is not South Africa. He's not taking on Siya Kolisi, but he's reminding the captain of the Springboks, the biggest name in rugby, you are nothing compared to what country we are playing for. And I think as a junior player or as any player in the squad looks at that saying, well, shit, if Siya's in the firing line, if he can be called out by our coach, then that means I'm very much in and around that space as well. So it's such an interesting, insight into what goes on inside that camp. So I thought for me it was a much better episode than episode one. I thought episode one was a little bit nebulous. I still miss having the marks and the coaches during the games. I think for me, I love that insight. I love the what was sort of being said when they make decisions like who to send on when, for example, reactions to specific moments and stuff like that. I really, really enjoy that kind of insight. We haven't had that just yet. I don't think we're going to get it, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, and I think it also, what I really like is the rawness. It shows you that it's not pretty. The modern sport, professional sport, is not a pretty environment. It's very glamorous from the outside. You rock up, you've got the nice cars, you rock up in a team bus, you look nice, you run out, you play a nice game, coaches give a press conference. It looks very glamorous. The reality behind the scenes is that it's cutthroat, it's intense, and it's hectic. And I like the fact that this reminds us of how hectic it is. And it's just not, I mean, we sometimes take it for granted and we think, oh, well, they get paid so much, they have to do it. But then you get reminded of just how grueling it is to be a professional athlete, how difficult it is to overcome certain obstacles, how the coaches sometimes have to be, tough love, and how they have to sometimes be aggressive and they get the interface, and how they have to try and pick up players to make sure that they are at their best at all times, and really sort of lay bare the demands of professional sport. So what did you think, of the episode? I said, RASSIE ERASMUS at the end, giving him an absolute rollicking, which is a precursor to what we're going to see in the next episode, which will be, I imagine, the remainder of the group stages, plus the first quarterfinal against France. That will be I don't know how many, I'm actually just check out exactly how many episodes are in the series. But yeah, that for me will probably make the next sort of logical sense. A couple of group games, and then the France quarterfinal. But let me know what you think of the series down in the comments below. Please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.